my name is Maylin and welcome back to my channel. I'm a flutist, performer, and music teacher located in the city of Kamloops, British Columbia, and this is my channel where we learn all things flute, so thank you so much for joining me here today. In today's video, we're going to be resuming the long-awaited series, How to Play the Flute for Beginners. In today's video, we're going to be learning the low C and low C sharp, so if you're interested, then just keep on watching. As always, if you have any questions about the video, please feel free to drop them in the comment section down below. I do my best to answer them as soon as I see them. Also, if you have any issues when it comes to practicing, feel free to check out my free practice guide, also located in the description down below. It gives you 8 really easy steps to follow to help guide your practice sessions. Alright, so let's just get right into today's video. So, as you might recall, we will be reading from my favorite book here, the Trevor Wise Beginner's Book for the Flute, Part 2. And I'm actually going to be starting on page 68. So this is the introduction of low C sharp and low C. So I'm going to put up the fingering chart here and the little blurb that Mr. Y writes right over here. So we see that essentially the low C sharp is going to be all the keys, and you're also going to be adding this little gizmo. So just as a reminder, when you see all of those, it goes from left hand to right hand, and then that little divider is the little line between the 4 little circles there is your left hand, and then the one on the other side is the right on the bottom. So to play the low C sharp, he says C sharp and C, the lowest notes on the flute, are rather more difficult. Use the tone exercise below to gain in strength in these notes. So we're just going to go over the fingerings here before we get into my tips with playing the low C and C sharp. We're going to make sure we have all the right fingerings here. So you're going to put down your left hand 1, 2, 3, as well as the thumb in the back. And then on your right hand 1, 2, 3, and then for the low C sharp, your flute might look different than mine because I have a low B, so that gives me that extra key there. You might only have these 2 keys on the bottom. So for the low C sharp, you're just going to finger this first key here. So that's what this C sharp should sound like. And then to get the low C, all you're going to do is you're going to roll your pinky so you get that second key there as well. So they're both going to be pressed down, and that's the low C. So these notes can be very, very difficult for a beginner to play right off the bat. So there's a few things I would recommend in order to get playing a nice strong sound in the lower register. So what I like to do is I like to go from the note that you're most comfortable with. So even if that is as high as like your low G, that's totally all right. Start with a note that you feel you're most confident you get the most beautiful, strong sound out of. So let's start again with that example, the low G. So what you're going to do is you're going to play that low G at a nice long tone so you can get familiar with how it feels. What you're going to do is you're going to focus on these 3 main things. So your embouchure, then you're going to focus on your breath support, and then you're going to focus on your fingers at the end. So really you're going to be focusing primarily on the embouchure and your breath support. So start on a note that you're comfortable with. Again, I'm going to be using the example as the G. So you probably won't be using vibrato. So in the middle of that note there, I just kind of got rid of it just so it would emulate what you might be sounding like. What you really want to focus on is getting that nice, open, beautiful sound, as beautiful as you can get it. And as you get comfortable with those notes, what I want you to do is I want you to go down 1 note at a time. So whatever notes that you know, I like to go down chromatically. So I'd be going down from G down to G flat or F sharp, F, and then E, and then E flat, D sharp, D, and then from D to C sharp, and then to C. So that would be my recommendation in how to get used to playing those low notes. So essentially it would look a little bit like this. introducing yourself to those low notes. Now make sure that when you are going down, that the first thing that'll change will be definitely in your embouchure. So what happens is that as you play the lower notes, you need a bit of a slower air, and what happens is your embouchure is going to open up ever so slightly. So just make sure that you don't have any extra tension in your cheeks or around your mouth, so you don't want to have any smile lines or anything like that. But you will notice that your embouchure will open up just ever so slightly as you start going down into the lower register. And then secondly, with your breath support, you're definitely going to have a lot of strength there, a lot of support, so making sure that you take a nice deep breath, just like you're yawning. But what happens is that the air gets a little bit slower when we get into the lower register. So you might be using a lot more hot air. That's what I like to describe it. It's kind of like you're breathing hot air on a window, for example, but it's more concentrated. That's what I like to compare it to. However, it might not be as dramatic or as hot as blowing on a window or a mirror, for example. And then number 3, you really want to make sure that you have your fingers in the center of the keys as much as possible. And then when you're moving from the low D to that C sharp, making sure that you have a nice pickup with the pinky here. So you don't want to drag over the E flat key here, and really making sure that if you're not quite comfortable with it, making sure that it is nice and curved over rather than it being flat and or over or hyperextended. I have had a few students in the past who had trouble playing the lower notes because of the way that the fingers were placed, especially on that C sharp. So making sure that it is nice and curved over so you have lots of control over it, so it is not hyperextended and it doesn't make you uncomfortable. It certainly will be uncomfortable to start, especially because everyone has such different hands. So just make sure that you're taking your time with it and really being careful with yourself, and don't put yourself down if you can't get it right away. It's definitely one of the harder notes to play. Alright, so what I'm going to do is, now that we have been introduced to the note, we're going to do some exercises. So I'm going to start actually with the tone exercise for the low notes. This is on page 69. I'm going to put it up right over here. It's going to be very similar in format to what I did previously when I just went down chromatically starting from G. And here we are starting on G again, but instead of going chromatically down each note, we're just going to go down from G and then F sharp, so that's chromatically 1, but then we're going to stay on the G and then go chromatically down from there. But you're always going to start on that G note here. So if you wanted to practice this by yourself, I would highly recommend practicing it with those repeats. You're going to repeat the bar 2 times before moving on to the next one. And then also make sure that you are holding that last note there for as long as you can, the lower note, as you go down in the register. Again, taking nice deep breaths every single time before you play the next bar. And then do note that we are doing some interesting dynamics at the bottom. So we start on a mezzo forte with that G, and then as we go into the lower note, we're going to crescendo into a nice forte. So again, you're training yourself to use as much air as you need in order to get a beautiful sound and clarity in your tone. So I'm just going to play this again. I'm going to do it without the repeats, but I would highly recommend that you would do the repeats, and you could definitely do this as a warm-up exercise. So just to get your air flowing, getting yourself focused into getting your practice sessions, this is a great exercise to do. So now I'm going to do this exercise. If you want to do this with a metronome, you definitely can. I personally like using it without a metronome because I find the metronome can be a little bit distracting when I'm doing these tone exercises, and I really want to focus on getting a really nice, beautiful sound. What you can do if you do want to focus on something, because these can be a little bit draining when it comes to the mind, I would recommend using a tuner. So you can either buy like a physical tuner, or I have a tuner app that's called Tunable on my phone, and I've had it for a long time. And what you can do is, as you're playing these tone exercises, make sure that you're keeping in tune. So in this Tunable, it is something that I did pay for a while ago, but when I was in Toronto, almost all the musicians that I knew did actually use the Tunable app at home for practicing. So I recommend that you would do that, and you want to keep into the center of the bars here. So for example, this is what it looks like. Hopefully it comes up well, but you can see that there's a center line here, and that's where the note focuses on when you're playing. And what you want to do is you definitely want to make sure that you play within that bar. And you can actually change it to a beginner setting, so that actually makes the bar a little bit bigger, so it'll help you to get your basic tuning in there. So now I'm going to play the example here. before we move on to the next thing, the D flat there is another harmonic and harmonic writing for writing C sharp. So it would be exactly the same note, although the lettering is different. I just wanted to point that out to you. So making sure that you are playing the C sharp fingering when you're looking at the D flat. Oh, and then I also wanted to mention that it is very important that when you are playing this exercise to make note of the slurs. You're not going to be tonguing in between the G and whatever note you're playing. Make sure that you are playing through in one full breath. So it really helps you to focus on how much air you're using and then how you're focusing that air to getting those lower notes there. Alright, and now that we have done the tone exercise, we're going to go back over to page 68 and we're going to do some of those low exercises there right at the bottom of the fingerings that were given for the low C sharp and C. So I'm going to put up the Moderato right over here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly go through our first 6 starter bits before we play into the piece. So I'm just going to briefly go through the first usual 6 starter bits. I'm not going to go into any great detail, but just to make sure that we know what we're playing before we get into it. So number 1 would be like a key signature. We don't have a key signature here, just making sure that you do note that there are lots of C sharps in here and no C naturals, otherwise every other note is natural. 2, the time signature is in 3/4, so 3/4 notes per measure. 3, the tempo indication here is moderato, so you want to make sure that you're playing it at a nice moderate tempo. Moderato can be anywhere between 86 beats per minute and 98 beats per minute. Number 4, we're going to be looking at our dynamics. We don't have any dynamics written in here, so I recommend a nice mezzo forte to forte. Articulation, we do have slurs, so making sure that you do note when we do have the slurs. Essentially, they're going to be whenever we play that C sharp. So it's in bar 2, bar 4, and then the second last bar to the end. And then number 5, a roadmap. There is nothing there. We're just going to be reading it from the beginning to the end. Alright, so now we're going to play this. We'll play it at a slow moderato speed here. So I will have my metronome going just for a point of reference. And of course, if you are not confident with those letter names, feel free to write them in at the bottom, just so that, especially when you're playing the lower notes, so you're not too focused on remembering which one is which. And I won't be clapping and counting this one. It is relatively simple, just half notes and quarters. So now we're going to play it with the flute. So again, making sure you're taking nice deep breaths and that you're taking them when it's also noted in the piece there as well. So those are those little V's there with a little hook on the end. Those are Mr. Y's way of writing breath marks. So making sure you're taking a nice deep breath every single time you see those breath marks. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Alright, so that should be a good exercise. If you feel like that is way too fast to start, that's totally okay. Go back into the playback settings and set it to a slower tempo, whatever tempo you feel works best for you. And then you can slowly repeat that and go over, especially making sure that you're getting those nice low notes and your deep breaths to make sure that you are getting the most beautiful and clear sound that you can when you're playing this little exercise. Alright, and the next we're going to do is the Allegro underneath it, so I'm going to put that one up over here. So again, we're going to go through those first 6 starter bits before we get into playing it on the flute. Key signature, no key signature here, we are in C major if that's anything that you're interested in. Number 2 is our time signature, so we're playing 4/4, so it's common time, 4/4 notes per measure. So number 3, we're going to be looking at our tempo indication. So this one is Allegro. So again, quickly, so that can be anywhere between 110 and 132 beats per minute, and that's going to be for the final tempo. So of course, if you find that when you are learning this little exercise here that's too fast, always go back and slow it down to a tempo where you're not making any mistakes or very few mistakes, and then slowly work it up from there in your practice sessions. Number 4, we're going to be looking at our dynamics. No dynamics written, so mezzo forte to forte. 5, we're going to be looking at our articulation. We don't have anything too crazy. Just look at the last 2 bars there. So we have 1 slur between the F and the E at the beginning, and then we do have 2 staccatos on that last bar there. Making sure that you also notice that we do have a fermata at the end, so on that low C, of course. So that means we're going to hold it for at least an extra beat and a half. And then number 6, we're going to be looking at our roadmap. Nothing crazy, just from the beginning to the end. So again, I won't clap and count this one because it is quite straightforward. Just make sure that you do note that we are starting on a pickup bar, so we're starting on beat 4 rather than on beat 1. And then of course the bit of that bar is going to be the 4th bar there because there's only 3 beats in that one. And we're gonna start at, again, the lowest Allegro tempo here, so that's gonna be a quarter note equals 110. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Alright, so it should be a really fun little ditty there. So again, make sure that you go and slow it down to a tempo where you feel most comfortable, and then slowly speed it up over time, and making sure that you're really focusing on getting the most beautiful low C and C sharps that you can. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the next exercise. So we're jumping back onto page 69 here, and we're going to be looking at the scale exercise in C minor. So I'm going to put that right over here on your screen. So this one is like a nice little piece, or it's a nice exercise before we get into playing the piece for today. This one is going to have some of the similarities as the previous scale exercises, although there are some differences here. So we're going to go over our first 6 starter bits before we get into clapping, counting really quick, and then playing the piece. Of course, we're going to look at our key signature. So we do know by the title that we are in C minor, but it's always good to make sure that we know why it's in C minor. So we're going to look at that key signature there. So we have 3 flats, so that's E flat major is the relative major. So we're going to make sure we know how we find the minor key. So we're going to go down 3 letter names, or you can alternatively go up 6 letter names. So of course, E flat, D, C. So that's how we know that the relative minor could be C minor. Of course, we're going to look at the first note and the last note to see if we start on either of the tonics of those key signatures. So we start and we end on a C. Our low C is what we end on, of course. So it's a high indication we are in the minor key. Then we're going to check for the raised 7th. So going down 1 semitone from the tonic. So C, and then you're going to go down 1 semitone. If you go and look on a keyboard, that would be B natural. So of course we do have tons of B naturals in this piece. Almost every single B is natural. So we are in C minor, of course. So that is how we can check to make sure that we are in that key signature. 2, we're going to be looking at our time signature. So of course we are in common time, so 4/4. So that means we have 4 quarter notes per measure. Number 3, we're going to be looking at our tempo indication. So we don't have a tempo indication here. Of course, we want to make sure that we do use this as an exercise that we can achieve faster tempos at. But of course, start at a tempo that is nice and slow for you, where you're not making any mistakes, as I mentioned quite a lot previously. What I'm going to be doing for this piece is I'm actually going to be clapping it at a final tempo that I would hope for my students to be playing at this stage. So it's going to be a quarter note equals 86. This may be a little bit too tricky for you, and that is totally okay. Number 4, we're going to be looking at our dynamics. So I don't see any dynamics written in here. So again, we're going to be playing it at approximately mezzo forte or forte. And if you do want to write in, pen in your own dynamics, make sure that you do that for yourself, because that makes your own music unique to yourself. So I'd highly recommend doing that. Otherwise, making sure that you're at a beautiful mezzo forte to forte dynamic. Number 5, we're going to be looking at our articulation. So here we do have a lot of slurs written throughout the piece, especially over all of the 8th notes. So make sure that you do note when we do have those 8th notes there. Pretty much the entire exercise we are playing slurs. So really focus on getting a nice clean fingering action but when you are going through the piece. So that means that you want to make sure that all your fingers are coming up at the right times. Sometimes if we have one finger that's a little bit slower than the other, we might have some little hiccups, is what I like to call it. So we have little extra notes in between the notes that we are playing between. So really make sure that you start this at a nice slow tempo and you're getting all the notes cleanly between each one as you move from note to note. And if you do find that you are having some issues, make sure that you do take note of it right away and just focus between those 2 notes and figure out what your issue is before moving on to the other parts of the exercise. And then number 6, we're going to be looking at our roadmap. We don't have any decapos or repeats, so we're just reading it from top to bottom. Alright, so now we're going to do the quick clapping count here. So again, a quarter note equals 86. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And 1, 2, 3, rest. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And 1, 2, 3, rest. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. All right, very good. So the clapping and counting should be fairly straightforward. The tricky part is definitely going to be getting all those correct notes there, because we're actually playing 3 octave Cs in this exercise, really focusing on your range from your highest all the way down to your lowest note. So make sure that you are writing any note names that you need if you feel like you're not comfortable, especially the ones in the ledger line. I'm not going to go over any of the specific fingerings here for any of the older notes, but if you do have a need for a reminder, you can check in my description. I do have a link to a fingering chart there, so make sure that you are cross-referencing the notes and the note names and that you're getting all the correct fingerings there. Alright, so now we're going to get into playing the piece on the flute. So again, the quarter note is going to equal 86. Make sure that if you feel like you keep forgetting accidentals like E flats, the B flats, or the E flats or the A flats, make sure that you circle them or highlight them or do whatever you need in order to make sure that you can see them coming ahead as you start playing the piece. 1, 2, 3. Very nice. So some tips when it comes to practicing this on the flute. Again, making sure that you take note of all of the breath marks here. So when you start the piece, make sure you're taking a really nice, beautiful, deep breath. And then every other breath that you take, make sure it is nice and deep, because it is easy to get kind of stressed out and worked up when it comes to a lot of notes and seeing a lot of notes in front of you. Make sure that whenever you take a breath, it's not anxious and really uptight, because that just makes it more and more difficult to play the piece. So make sure that you feel that you're nice and centered every single time you take a breath. What I like to tell some of my other students is that if they're feeling anxious, to take a out of time breath. So that means even if you're playing with a metronome, for example, that you play the notes in time, but when you take a breath, you can take as much as you need in order to train yourself to feel nice and calm. So for an example, if we're doing the same tempo, I'm just going to play the first line here. So what I did there is I took a nice deep out of time breath in order to train myself to feel nice and calm every single time I take a breath. So I would recommend doing that if you're having any issues with feeling anxiety when it comes to playing lots of notes, to help train that. And then as you get more comfortable with that, you can slowly increase the speed of your breaths until you can take it in time again. My second tip here is definitely going to be playing those lower notes. So in the third line there, you might find out you're having a lot of difficulties moving from the low C to the E flat. I would recommend, first of all, checking to see if your instrument is in good condition. What I've noticed is with a lot of my beginner students, their instruments aren't always in the best condition. So making sure that you take your instrument into a technician every year or so to make sure that your instrument is nice and checked up. But you might find that the E flat is really stiff, so it might feel really difficult to move from that E flat to the low C or C sharp. I like to put a little bit of nose grease, which can be kind of gross. So you're just gonna essentially pat the base of your nose, or you can even do it behind your ear. Make sure you're nice and clean. And that might help to get you to slide from that E flat key to the bottom C. That's just going to take a little bit of time and practice. So make sure that you're being very mentally good with yourself. Don't put yourself down if you can't get that low C to the E flat right away. And it is a very difficult motion to get. And you really take your time and go back and forth between those two notes. Don't do it for too long because it can be really fatiguing on the pinky, but do it every minute for maybe a few minutes every single day, and you'll find that you'll slowly increase the strength of your pinky as well as the dexterity moving between the low C and E flat. And then I would also recommend, and then the last, mostly the last line here, that's the most tricky part of the exercise, that you write in any of those notes, especially with the C minor arpeggio on the second to last bar. So you're going to be playing all three of the C registers there. So you're playing the low, mid, and high C. So take a nice deep breath before you get into that. And again, you can even isolate that one bar, or you can even isolate the first 4 eighth notes, or you can even isolate the first 2 eighth notes. Do whatever you need to do in order to make sure that you are comfortable moving from that low note all the way up to the high note and back down again. It should be a really, really great challenge. All right, and now we're going to go on to our final piece of today. That's the ballet. So again, this is on page 69. I'm just going to put it up right over here. And we're going to go through our first 6 starter bits, and then we'll go into clapping and counting, and then playing the piece. Thank you so much for sticking along. This is going to be a great piece. And then this piece might actually take you a little while to learn because there are a lot of tricky things in here. That is totally okay. If it takes you a month, it takes you 2 months, it takes you 3 months, take as much time as you need. That is totally okay. Everyone moves at their own tempo. We're going to be first looking at our number 1 key signature. So we have B flat and E flat in the accidentals there between our treble clef and time signature. So that means you can either be in B flat major or G minor. So we're going to take a look and see if we can find out which one it is. So of course we're going to look at the first and last note to see if you have the tonic of either of those key signatures. So we start on a G and end on a G, so that's a high indication that we're in G minor. So we're going to take a look now to see if we can find any of the raised sevenths. So again, going down 1 semitone. So 1 semitone from G, the tonic, is F sharp, and we might also be looking for some raised 6, so that would be E naturals. So if you look at if you glance at the piece, you can see lots and lots of accidentals, lots of F sharps, and lots of E naturals. So I would say we're in G minor, which we are. It does say it at the top there, even though I might cut it out for the video. If you have the book, you'll see that it's listed there. Number 2, our time signature. We're in common time, 4/4, so 4 quarter notes per measure. Number 3, we have our tempo indication written here, so andante con moto, so it's andante with movement, and that's going to be a quarter equals 96. So that'll be the tempo I clap and play, but of course slow it down for your own practice session. Number 4, we're going to be looking at our dynamics. So we start at a mezzo forte. We don't have anything written until the last bar of the first line, where we have a decrescendo going down to piano, and then we don't have anything written until the second bar in the second line, where we have a nice crescendo. It can go up to maybe a mezzo forte or forte, totally up to you. And then 2 bars later, we have another decrescendo to piano there. And then on the third line, we have this really beautiful, a huge crescendo. So we have piano all the way at the beginning, and then you're going to go crescendo, crescendo, crescendo all the way to the very end, where you have that forte on the D, then come right back down to a mezzo forte on the last bar of the third line. You're going to play a mezzo forte all the way up essentially to the very end. In the third last bar, you have a decrescendo to piano, and that is all of our dynamics. And then number 5, we're going to be looking at our articulation. So we have lots of articulation here. So you're going to really want to make sure that you get all of it correct. See if you can find any patterns. Mostly I see that we have slurs over almost all of the eighth notes there. Sometimes we do have 2 slurred and 2 tongued. So I'm looking specifically at the first line, last bar, for example. But for the most part, we do have all 4 eighth notes slurred. Oh, we do have 2 staccatos in the second line, third bar. But other than that, we don't have any other specific articulation. So just make sure that you are otherwise playing a beautiful, nice, regular tonguing. So again, having that nice ha behind the note with an extra ta just to get that clarity at the beginning. Make sure that you do notice all of the breath marks there, because there are so many throughout the piece. You can either highlight them or circle them, do whatever you need to do. The breath marks will definitely help you when it comes to the overall phrasing of the piece. And then number 6, we're going to be looking at our roadmap. So we don't see any repeats or da capos, we're just reading it from top to bottom. And before I forget to mention, we do have a rel at the very end of the piece. That's short for rallentando, so that means slowing down gradually. So we're going to make sure when you play that you do slow it down ever so slightly to place that last note there. Alright, so now we're going to do a clap and count of the piece. So again, this is going to be a quarter note equals 96. And as a reminder, we are also playing on a pickup bar, so we are starting on beat 4 instead of beat 1. Also, I won't be clapping and counting the grace notes just because it's always a little bit tricky to place them when you're clapping them. However, I will play them with the flute. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 20 and a 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4, 1, 2 and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and a 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, rest. Alright, so that one should definitely be a little bit tricky. Just note that we do have those dotted 8ths and 16ths here and there, specifically second complete bar, and then also in the last line there, the second bar, and then we do also have some dotted quarters and eighth notes, so make sure that you do note those when you are clapping counting. Alright, so now I'm going to play it with the flute. Again, a quarter equals 96. 1, 2... So that's going to definitely be a tricky piece. So if it takes you a little bit to get comfortable with it and working it in little sections so that it makes it a little bit more easy to work through the piece and get through some of those difficult parts. I did notice we do have some tenuto notes that I missed earlier when we were talking about our articulation. So specifically on, I'm looking at the 4th, or anytime you have the low C, besides at the very end you have that long line, so that's a tenuto, so that means you want to make sure you hold it for the entire note's duration. You don't want to cut it short or anything like that. Alright, so that's going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much for joining me here for the return of the How to Play the Beginners series. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I know it is a long one, so thank you so much for sticking to the end. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section down below. And if you have issues with practicing, check out my free practice guide. I just want to say thank you so much for joining me here today. Also, Happy New Year if you're watching this when I release it. I'm super excited for all that this year, 2022, will bring. And I hope the best for you and all of your families. And as always, happy fluting!